Hello and welcome back to Widowed AF. You've got me today, that's Rosie Gilmoss, and joining me all the way from across the pond, I've got Emily Clark-Walton. Welcome, Emily, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Rosie. It's really great to be here.
I'm really loving getting so many American widows involved. It's because, as I've mentioned previously on the podcast, like the first sort of support group I joined was at the Hot Young Widows Club. I'm going to try and pronounce Nora McKinney's name. I think that's how you pronounce it. And so we've been on a similar journey. I mean, you were widowed literally a month before I was. Presumably we joined the group around the same time, and it became a closed group, didn't it? So we've stayed the same people in it kind of all the way through. So you do watch people go through their highs and their lows, and to actually be able to sit across from us, and I don't know why we didn't do this before actually, but to just sit face to face, as it were, with people and hear their stories, it's really lovely actually.
Yeah, I completely agree. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't found the group.
No.
I was lucky to have an in-person support group as well, but just having the connection to so many people just instantly, and just being able to just find your piece of the story, their story, and connect with that has been really tremendous.
And it was things like the fact that it was called the Hot Young Widows Club that drew me to it, because I did not recognise myself as a widow, the stereotypical widow. And I liked the sort of tongue-in-cheek. In fact, it was Nora's podcast, Terrible Thanks for Asking, that led me to it. So look, Circle of Life and all that. And I felt like I was among people that I recognised. And because we're all on different time zones, I would be kind of drunk and, alone and sad in the nighttime, and there'd be people awake in America, and there'd always be somebody to have a chat with, and it was very, very comforting. You felt less alone.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, this is not me and you having a catch-up visit. I should probably get on with the matter in hand. So, Emily, obviously you're in the club. Would you like to tell the listeners how you got here?
Sure, thank you. So I met Jeremy back in 2001. I was 22. I had just moved to Seattle, Washington, so West Coast. And I was a lab manager in a psychology lab at the University of Washington. And he started as a graduate student about a month later. And excuse me. So he was 5.5 years older than me, and we started hanging out, and I actually entered the psychology program after that. We were both doing PhDs in neuroscience, and he was actually my my TA for a short while, and we were dating, and we couldn't tell anybody. I completely bombed the first exam, so that was sort of his guarantee that no one could be like, hey, he's playing favorites. So he graduated, he started a postdoc, was just a brilliant man. His research was in adolescent alcohol exposure and how that impacts decision making later in life.
Fascinating, because I've spoken quite openly about the fact that I have battled alcohol.
Yeah.
And going back through my life, I mean, I started to drink at about 14.
Oh, wow.
So that's fascinating to hear that he was in that field. I'm going to pick your brains on this at another time.
Absolutely. Anytime. So, his career was just taking off. I was in my last year of graduate school when we got married in 2007. Our first son, Quentin, was born in 2008, and I defended my dissertation that same year. I like to say I gave birth twice that year.
Nice. Also, Quentin is a very cool name.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that's very cool.
Yes. I think it means of the Queen's estate.
Oh.
And yeah. So Quentin was born in 2008. Our younger son, Alex, was born in 2010. And, life seemed pretty good. We bought a house in 2012. We were kind of checking off all the boxes that one feels they need to do to have, quote unquote, a normal life. Yes, perfect normal life. So we were both avid bicycle commuters. So we would ride our bikes to and from the University of Washington. It was about 6 miles round trip. And there was kind of a long hill on the way back home. And he would kind of be hunched over, obviously, cycling as you do, you're sort of in that hunched position. And he would get home and he would just feel terrible and exhausted. And he felt like he wasn't in shape and like he was somehow like not maintaining physical condition.
And this is coming after a period of doing this sort of daily.
Yeah. I mean, he had always had stomach issues, and he told me as a child that he would get frequent stomach aches. And so we just sort of chalked it up to that. But in November of 2015, November 13th, 2015, he was just in so much pain. He felt like maybe it was appendicitis or something extreme like that. And so we ended up calling an ambulance because I had the two kids at home. We didn't have anyone who could come watch them. So I stayed home. The ambulance took him away and to presumably, have his appendix removed. And so I was sort of holding down the fort and working at the same time. And I remember I was sitting on a shuttle bus. I was off to meet with one of the researchers that I was helping as part of my job. I was no longer in science specifically, and I got a text from him, and he said, "Well, shit, it's about as bad as it could be." And I'm sitting on this tiny little shuttle surrounded by people, and my heart just sank. And I got off the shuttle and I called him, and he said that they had done a CT scan and they had found a large mass in his colon, and that it had also spread to his liver, his lungs, and his lymph nodes. And so that was
Oh, I'm so sorry. This every time I hear these things, it gets me as if I'm hearing like the first ever story like this.
Right.
They're all so, you can hear the pain as you say it,
Yeah.
and even the way he sent the text, like you can hear a bit of his personality there, but also that's a very blokey way of going. Oh, fuck. It's,
Definitely.
oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, thank you. So that was 3 days after he had initially gone into the hospital, so it was November 16th. He started on chemotherapy right away. So he was 42 when this all happened. And Thanksgiving came and he had so I'm not sure if you know that first line treatment for colon cancer, colorectal cancer is it's called FOLFOX, and you have an infusion. You go into the infusion clinic, you're there for a few hours, and then you have a central line that continues to pump additional treatments into your body while you wear this little, like a fanny pack. It's basically a fanny pack, and so you do that for 2 days, and then you're disconnected, and then you continue every other week doing this pump for however many rounds. Usually it's about 12 rounds.
And how did that make them feel? What would make him feel while he had this on? Did it make him feel unwell or just a sort of inconvenience?
Tired, very tired. FOLFOX particularly has some very peculiar side effects. One of them is cold sensitivity.
Okay.
So anything like ice, oh no, ice cream, anything cold can be very, very. They can be very sensitive to
very
that.
Painful would it be?
Yeah, and just and over long periods of time, they can develop neuropathy. So just sort of that tingling or loss of sensation in extremities. For him, it was his feet, and so we actually found a CBD oil that worked really well to sort of relieve that discomfort, the neuropathy discomfort.
I hear a lot of good things about CBD, I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then what? And then from there, what happens next?
So he continued with the FOLFOX, and that I think he did 12 rounds of that, and they do kind of intermediate scans here and there to see if it's working. Do we continue to do this? Do we bother? And
do we bother? That feels like such a...
I know, right?
I get it.
So several of the masses were showing some response. I mean, the one in his colon was just enormous. And so it was causing him physical pain. He was on a lot of pain medication, which, has its own side effects
Of
as well.
course.
So most of the masses were showing some response except for his lungs. And it was unfortunate because it was spread across both lobes. So it wasn't like they could just, do surgery and remove part of it. Uh, so we kind of kept on with the treatment that the doctor said. Um, One thing that was a little hard. So Jeremy was an only child. He was very much a person who liked control, and he kind of wanted to shield us, I think,
Mm,
from what he was going through. So I think I only attended maybe 3 or 4
mm,
total visits with his oncologist, meetings with his oncologist. So Jeremy was sort of receiving this treatment and receiving the information about, what was going on with no second set of ears
yeah.
to process.
And actually, you do need a second set of ears, don't you?
Absolutely. I mean, I understand why he did, but I really wish that I had been there for some of the early sessions. I think I would have understood things at least a little bit more.
I can hear why he did it as you talk.
Yeah.
He was husband and father before anything else,
Yeah.
and he wanted to
Yeah.
protect you and your children. But yes, I do understand the need for somebody else to hear the information because you can't process that
Yeah.
yourself, can you?
Yeah.
Poor guy.
Right. So, a little bit of backstory. A year before, in 2014, so I think I mentioned only child. So, his parents, Jeremy's parents, had been living in Florida, and they wanted to, be able to see their grandkids. So, they were planning to do the snowbird thing where they would spend winters in Florida and then summers in Seattle. And so they had just moved to Seattle to start that first light round of their new lifestyle.
What was that called again? Did you say snowbird?
Snowbird. Yeah.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And
It's very, very common. My
I bet
grandparents did the same thing.
we haven't got enough climate difference in the country, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. So, they had just moved here in May of 2014 when, Jeremy's dad was diagnosed with leukemia.
Oh no.
So he started treatment for that. Unfortunately, I mean, Seattle has excellent, excellent care for all kinds of cancers, blood and otherwise. And so he actually had a stem cell transplant, and so he was dealing with his own stuff. And we decided to, we're going to circle the wagons, we're going to pool our resources, and so we remodeled our basement uh, to um, to accommodate them and have that they could have their own living space downstairs, and we could all just sort of be together and help and support each other.
That's a
So
very generous offer, actually,
yeah,
to live with your in-laws, or anybody in your home, actually. Although I believe American houses are massive, aren't they? So you probably had some space.
some, sometimes
Oh
Seattle
yeah, well,
not so much, but yeah. So we completed that renovation in um, in 2017, in December of 2017. And throughout this time, Jeremy was still working. I was working, our kids were growing, and, they just got used to what we called him bionic dad. So because he had the pack on all the time, we said that that was his medicine. And we did eventually, bring up the C
Mm.
word. This is what cancer is. And it's really hard with kids because in 2015, Quentin was 7 and Alex was 5. So they were a little bit aware of things, but not really. Jeremy was continuing to work. I mean, he was, publishing papers, he was writing grants, he was running a lab. I mean, he was a very, very successful person, so smart. He actually won a presidential early career award from Barack Obama. He got to meet Barack Obama.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah,
What did he say? Was he nice?
it was really cool. I think he
Totally.
was. Jeremy was just like, I'm just going to shake his hand. And
Fangirling completely, right?
yep, totally.
I hope you have a picture of this that you can send me.
I have a picture. So I wasn't allowed to be at the ceremony proper. I was there in Washington, D.C. when this all happened. We got to do a tour of the White House. I did not get to see the actual meeting. I do have a picture, though, because they did have a photographer present.
Well, if you send that to me, I'd be very well.
Yeah. I have a picture of him. He's on deck. He's sort of next in line to shake
That's very
Barack Obama's hand. So, yeah. So he, excuse me, throughout this whole time was just, continuing to live his life as though he didn't have cancer. And that's one of the things I think about prolonged illness is, for the most part, you're I mean, yes, you have the side effects from the chemo and you're tired, but life is relatively normal, and you're kind of going along, you're doing your things. And then at some point, that balance shifts and you start to be even more tired and you start to have less energy and the things that you used to enjoy just sort of start to slip away.
So at this point, do you believe that there's a chance he can beat this still? Is there hope?
The doctor was pretty clear that this was not something that was going to just go away. I was very angry initially with the decision not to do surgery, not to remove the primary tumor, not to try to remove as much as possible from his body. And going through this now with my mom, I see why. Um, we'll we'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you about your mum in a little bit. Unbelievable. This is the
Yeah.
listeners will catch up soon with this.
Yep. But it was a quality of life thing, and that was really the key was, maintaining his quality of life as much as possible.
So further surgery is not really going to prolong his life
He had
enough to
Yeah,
justify the invasion and the drop in quality of life post surgery, presumably.
right, right. So, yeah, so he just continued the full Fox, the first line chemo treatment eventually stopped working, so we moved to full Fury, which is the second line treatment, and that's got its own fun side effects. He had a lot of sores in his mouth.
Mm.
It's very painful sometimes for him to eat or drink. Um, and we tried a clinical trial. He qualified for a clinical trial, and that just was ultimately not successful.
Mm.
And but again, he carried on. He soldiered on. He had a lab to run. He had graduate students and undergraduates as well. He employed a lot of undergraduates in his lab to do the research, and he continued to publish and share his knowledge with the world and make a huge contribution to research into alcohol and alcohol exposure and addiction. Um,
That's making me kind of well up here. Am I right? We all know I'm a
yeah,
natural emotional wreck anyway, but just to hear you say that the contribution he made to the world, because obviously he
yeah,
made an enormous contribution to you and to your children, but to hear that what he did so much good in the world and that he has a legacy that will far outlive him. And I think that's very powerful words to hear.
yeah. I actually just got a message from his mentor, his postdoc mentor. They just published another paper where he's the last author. That was his contribution. So he's continuing to have this ripple effect, which I think is one of the beautiful things about science.
Yeah.
Um,
But it's really powerful hearing you say this. And it's something that I guess we all want. We all want to leave behind a positive legacy. And many of us will do that just in our children or our grandchildren, in our work, in our charity work, whatever it may be. But to leave a legacy behind is what we all want, isn't it?
that was Jeremy's biggest fear. And we would talk about this a lot. We would sort of talk about the after. Um, and his biggest fear was being forgotten. It's like that movie Coco. Oh my goodness. That movie just gets me every time.
I can't watch it.
Oh, nope. Don't do it.
That's, I mean, I guess I can relate, and I do think. I mean, I'm going off on a little digress here, and I won't keep you here too long. But I do think it's one of the issues that people find when widows get into another relationship, where people, even though they've never experienced it themselves, have a knee-jerk reaction to it. And I think it is that the fear of being replaced and forgotten. What people who haven't experienced widowhood don't understand is much like having a second child. You don't stop loving the first one, right? So,
Yeah.
but I do think that it stems. I've tried to be quite charitable. It's not always easy, but I do try, because I think it stems from your own insecurity and fear of being forgotten, which nobody wants that, right?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And that's part of the reason why I'm here, actually.
Yes, and it's what the primary reason I do this. It is to give people like us a space to come and share our stories about them in a way that we've never been able to do before, and it puts out these stories will stay out there. They will be out there for as long as people listen to podcasts, right? So they're out there.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to ask you now. Would you just take me into those kind of the end times?
So his father was battling leukemia. He was battling colon cancer. We remodeled the basement, and it was finally completed right before Christmas of 2017. And his parents moved in, and it was really lovely. It was nice to have them there. Our boys could just walk down the stairs and say hi to Nana and Grandpa. And I think they were able to enjoy that time. Jeremy and his dad were able to spend time together. They had not always had the easiest relationship. I think they always really respected each other, but it was nice for them to kind of regain some of that
And possibly to
connection.
have the kind of conversations that sadly you only have when somebody has got a
Right.
terminal diagnosis. And
Yeah.
we put an episode out today, and within it, John, his wife, as you will know, died of bowel cancer.
Yes.
He talked about, in relation to a previous guest episode as well, the idea of the one gift that cancer or terminal illness does give you is the opportunity to
Yeah.
say what you need to say. I don't know if it's worth the trade-off of watching somebody suffer like that, but it's it does give you the option to say things before the end, which I think is
Yeah.
it is a gift of a form, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, so, Jeremy was still working. I was still working. His parents were downstairs. And Jeremy was needing oxygen. So his lungs, the impact, the metastases in his lungs were beginning to take a toll. And so first he was on a home oxygen machine. And so he would just kind of plug himself in, while he was home. And then we decided to get a portable oxygen machine, and he would just, again, he was trying to live his life as normally as possible and on his own terms. And I remember we went to he was a builder. He was a gardener. He was a builder. He was one of these people who he could just walk into a space and he could envision what the potential, what it could be. But not only that, he had the ability to execute on that vision and make it exactly the way that he wanted to. Our home was beautiful. Our garden was just incredible. I mean, he would walk around with little pruners and he would just prune things here and there.
Brains and brawn here. What a man.
Exactly. Right. So he had this table that he wanted to build. And so I remember we went out to get these very heavy, these 4 table brackets, and we picked them up. We paid for them at the store, and he wanted to carry them out to the car. And I said, okay, you can go for it. And he was carrying them out to the car, and he got into the car and was just, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. We had one of those pulse oximeters, the finger
Yeah.
measures your oxygen saturation, and he had dropped down to
Oh
60%.
God. But you can hear him wanting to sort of reclaim some of his
Yes.
masculinity and his, I want to build this thing, I can do it. And then the frustration of, actually, no, I can't.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
Mm.
heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to watch that, and, I mean, it was really bad. We decided at that point to take him in to the ER, and so they immediately put him on oxygen, a very high flow rate, and I remember the ER doc turning to me and saying, "He's not going home." And and then it that was just when it kind of flooded in. And so that was a Friday, and he was in the hospital for, let's see, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, yeah, and he passed away on Tuesday, and I'll walk you through that.
Can I just ask you, so in the UK,
Yeah.
for end of life care, people would generally be transported to a hospice. Is it the same in America?
It depends. It really it's a v I think the experience is not singular. I think there's a lot of different paths that people can take.
And was he still in the hospital at the
He was
end?
in the oncology ICU,
Yeah.
at the same hospital where Quentin was born, and,
Oh,
oh, actually, we completed the remodel in December of 2017, had a lovely time with Jeremy's parents living in the house. Um, in early February of 2018, Jeremy's father contracted pneumonia. He was on oxygen, and his lungs were not in great shape. I believe there was some COPD and emphysema, and
mhm.
he was taken into the hospital, and he ultimately passed away on February 6th of 2018,
Um,
3 weeks to the day before Jeremy passed away.
oh my goodness. Oh, his poor mom. And sorry to ask
Yeah.
this, but was Jeremy aware about, was he mentally still with you?
Oh, yes.
Well, that's almost worse that he watched his dad go first.
Yeah. So, I remember, um, when Jeremy went into the hospital to see his dad for the last time, and he had gotten a ride with his mom, and he wanted me to come pick him up and take him home, and he texted me, and he said, "He's gone, and I'm done." So I went and I picked him up, and, yeah, so that was hard because we had to process this loss with our kids and with Jeremy's mom. She had just lost her husband of 44 years.
And the
The
boys,
boys.
oh, the poor boys. That's because my children are very, very close to my dad.
Right.
And it just, oh, and much, I mean, similar, different circumstances. But my parents lived with me for a little while, and I can relate so much to just popping downstairs and they were there.
Right.
And for those poor boys, and for all of you to have to go through this enormous loss and then get smacked in the face a few days later,
Yeah.
I want to hug you through the
Oh.
screen.
So, yeah, so, as I mentioned, I think it was on the 23rd of February that Jeremy went into the hospital for the last time, and he, um, was admitted to the oncology ICU, and they had him on oxygen, and, um, he was still continuing to work. He was still making calls to, making sure his lab was running. Literally, the day before he died, he was actually calling a collaborator on a grant to see if one of his postdocs could take over that piece of the grant. He was always looking out for people, and he was an excellent mentor. He really
That's
was.
an excellent human. I mean, that's what he sounds like, is an excellent human. And I can feel myself feeling quite sad. I never met the guy. And such is the power of these stories because you get to know them. You get to know a little piece of them. And I had no clue about this. And it's true, they take the good ones first, eh?
They do. They do. So, I my mother-in-law and I would and Jeremy's cousin actually came in to help out with the kids, and so we would kind of rotate and take turns going in into the hospital, bringing him lattes. He was a huge latte junkie, and he had to have his very designer, not designer, but the well-crafted latte.
What kind of milk? Talk to me. What kind of milk?
Um, he was 2%. So yeah, 2% dairy milk, yeah. So he almost always I have so many pictures of him with just a latte cup in hand. And, so we took turns over the next few days sort of managing the boys and going into the hospital, and some of his friends stopped by. One of my dear friends, came to visit, and he wanted to see her, so we all gowned up. We had to, gown up to go into the ICU, and, he, yeah, he was trying to continue to have life be as normal as possible, even though he's in the hospital with an oxygen mask on. Um, but it was clear that things were slipping. I mean, there wasn't enough oxygen getting to his brain, and he was starting to have some delusions, not delusions, but it was his brain was obviously being impacted, and he, at one point was like referring to the hospital bed as like a race car, and okay, we're good. Are we racing this around the hospital? What are we doing here? It was
I think
kind of
John's
funny.
first wife, I think she thought there was chickens in there at the
Yep,
end as well. And he
yep.
said, no, no, there's no chickens.
So, I remember that Monday evening, I was back at home, and his doctor called and said that they were gonna put him on this BiPAP machine. So that was it was like almost like a helmet that would literally force air into his lungs. And excuse me. Um, and she said, "You should bring your boys."
Oh, goodness. And that, I mean, I was going to ask you whether the boys came and said goodbye, because it's a very personal choice, and very
Yeah,
much depends on the child and all sorts of things. So some people do and some people don't. And obviously you did take them in, and I don't imagine it was
yeah.
pleasant, but were they able to tell him what to do?
Well, we didn't frame it that
Mm.
way, and I couldn't do that. They were 7 and 9 at the time, and, um, we watched The Goonies, which was a great one of Jeremy's favorite movies, classic, and we ate, ice cream and popsicles from the cafeteria, and, Jeremy had a hat. He'd kind of developed a hat thing, like, he really liked hats, and I think a lot of that was from the cold sensitivity with the full fox. So we had these hats that had little ear flaps. Jeremy had brought a sort of a straw fedora type thing, and then a little like a newsboy cap as well. And so my boys were wearing the caps and sitting on the bed and watching Goonies and eating ice cream. And then they went home, and I spent the night with him, and he was clearly losing sort of his awareness. I mean, he was on tons of pain medication by this point. He was on morphine, and, he kept trying to pull the mask off, and I would hear the monitor beeping, and I would wake up, and I would gently try to pull it back onto his face. And, yeah, that's how we passed the night.
So, and that night was the night that he died?
He died the next morning.
Mm.
Yeah, so like I said, I spent the night with him, continuing to put the mask back on him that he was so desperately trying to take off, and he would just look at me with this sadness, like, "Why are you doing this?" And at one point, I think just the pain, I don't know what it's like to not be able to breathe, but I have to imagine it is a really scary feeling, and he reached out and said, "Help me." And I was just blown away by that, and I felt so helpless because I couldn't do what his body needed.
Oh, nobody could. Oh my goodness, if you could have willed
Yeah.
him better, you would have done, right?
Yeah. And, so toward the early morning on Tuesday, this was the 27th, it was, it was clear that things were not going to, it was time. And so they took the mask off of him, and his heart rate just shot straight up. I mean, his heart was trying so hard to push whatever little bit of oxygen was in there out to the rest of his body. He always had a strong heart.
They
And
can't. They can't.
big heart. And so I found his phone and I played Bob Dylan like a Rolling Stone as he took his last breath.
God, Emily, you're setting me off over here. Oh, stop it. I'm meant to be a hardened widow listening to these stories. Oh, goodness me. But
Yeah.
like we talked a little bit about earlier, the idea of having a good death.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like that is the final gift that you gave him, was to give him that good death.
Yeah.
To be surrounded by people you love, to give him that evening with his boys, to give your boys that. As they grow older and mature emotionally, they will treasure that and be so grateful to you for doing that.
I hope so.
Like, well, I say this to myself a lot
Right.
when I have the children. I'm like, they're going to thank me one day for the mountains
Yeah.
I've climbed. But
So,
what happened? I mean, the aftermath
yeah.
and going home and telling the boys that their dad had gone, that must have been so traumatic for all of you.
They
Um,
Yeah, they went to school on Tuesday, and I wanted them to just, have that
one,
last day.
we talk, lots and lots of people talk about this one last day.
Yeah.
Just let them have these few hours where they don't know, because from now on their life's changed. Yeah.
Um, Family did start to fly in from other parts of the country, and I'm not sure if the boys were like, "Oh, that's interesting. Why are all these people showing up?" Because actually my birthday was 4 days later. So Wednesday morning, I took them upstairs with Marcia, with Jeremy's mom, and we told them, and Quentin just wailed. He just wailed, and Alex was angry. He just, "Why are you telling me this terrible news?" And
Yes.
he wanted to be away. He just wanted to get away from it. Um, and fortunately, they were surrounded by lots of love, and
And in that moment, that is all you can do for them, isn't it? Because you cannot take the pain away. You can't bring back, you can't give them the one thing that they want. And
no,
I found this quite hard to accept, because I've lived most of my life, on a fairly good moral trajectory. And I've been raised and believed that if you want something enough, you can find it, you can fix it, you can do it. What do you mean I can't bring him
right.
back? What do you mean?
It does not compute. It does not compute. So,
And you're 5 years into
yeah.
this journey now. So presumably life looks very different. How are the boys now? How are they?
They are, I would say, doing really well. So my mother-in-law stayed with us. I mean, she continued to live with us for a while. And I continued on in that house for as long as I could.
It's
I
difficult, isn't it, to stay in
It
the
is
house?
hard. Yeah, because, well, for a lot of reasons. I mean, Jeremy had just made it so ideal. And the garden was lovely, but I'm not a gardener. And it was like every day stepping outside, I would look around and say, I'm failing. This was just one more thing. I couldn't manage it all. Um,
Powerful, because yes, to this, yes, I can relate. It's another responsibility,
mhm.
another way that you feel that you're letting them down. Yeah, I get that.
And, my mother-in-law was dealing with two losses.
Mm.
She lost her entire family in a month. And so she was deep in grief, deep in loss.
Mm.
And yeah, it was a tough time. We supported each other. We took a lot of trips, just, I think, trying to escape, trying to bring
Yeah,
some semblance of happiness. We went to, let's see, Legoland. Took my kids to Legoland, and we went.
we've got one of those over here.
Oh,
It is.
good.
I think yours might be better.
Maybe. We went to, this indoor water park, Great Wolf Lodge. It's just a, basically Vegas for kids. It's everything is designed to entertain them. Um, we went to
I'm writing it down.
California. What's that? Writing it
I'm writing
down?
it
Okay.
down. We're going to America this year. I don't think we're that far away.
Yeah.
Um, I did similar. I booked lots of
Yeah.
trips. I took them to Cape Verde for Christmas.
Oh,
I
wow.
couldn't afford to do that, but I did it anyway because the thought of spending Christmas either
Yep.
at my home,
Yep.
at his parents' home, or my parents' home, none of those felt right. I
No.
needed to be somewhere completely
Yeah.
different.
We went to the Washington coast for Christmas. We had a lovely Christmas on the coast, and it was, yeah, it was hard.
Different.
Different. It's different, and I think that's
It has to be different,
what
doesn't it?
helped.
Yeah.
Yes. You can't, you either have to kind of plod on and try to carry on the same traditions, or you just do something completely different. That was what we chose to do. Um,
And I don't know if you mind
no,
me
no, no.
asking this, but you are also
I
remarried, aren't you?
am.
And are you married to another widow?
He is not a widow, but
Brave.
he
Let's hear this.
widower. He his son is medically fragile. I'll respect his privacy,
Of
but
course.
so I he has a great deal of compassion and empathy because of that, and the um, connection with the medical environment and being constantly, at hospitals, and so that I think has really
Mm.
made
Yeah,
him.
I think because we
Yeah.
talked even yesterday about how
Mm.
quite a lot of widows do gravitate to other widows,
Yes.
and I'm wondering whether it is less about the fact you're widowed and more about the shared trauma.
Yep.
The idea that you have both an understanding of living, with the fight or flight hormones
Right.
coursing through your body, and
Yeah.
yeah, I think actually that makes sense. I'd not thought
Sure.
of that before. And how did the boys respond?
So I met Tim in 2019, and we met online. So another widow friend of mine, she was a year plus further out than I was, and she was like, "You know what? I want to try this online dating thing. Will you be my wing woman?" And so we and another divorced friend of hers, we all got together. We had a gals session where we, picked our photos and completed our profiles. And I chose Bumble, and because the woman
Yeah,
initiates first, and I didn't want a bunch of random
bit less scary.
messages.
Tinder didn't exist when we were dating first time around, right?
And so, I would match with people, and I would try to initiate a conversation. It was just like, oh,
Mm.
yeah, just like pulling teeth. Like, does no one have a personality out there? And all the profiles looked the same. It was like man with fish, there man in
I was going to say, yeah,
bathroom,
men with
man on
fish.
motorcycle, man standing at the edge of a cliff doing the YOLO pose. I mean, it was,
Or man in a group of
yeah,
other men, so you've no
right.
idea which one is them.
I swear they must have photo packages. Here's your dating app photo package. Here's your fish. Here's your dog.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just, I hated it, and I only had to do it for a week, because on day
Ah,
7 I was gonna delete the app. I was just, over it. And on day 7, Tim and I matched, and I loved his profile because I could hear him through his words.
and no fish,
What's
presumably.
that? Oh, no
No
fish,
fish.
no fish, none. Not a single fish. Yes. Yep. And it felt genuine and authentic, and it was, and we had our first date a week later, and it was just instantaneous. At every level, we just connected. We just got each other. We had the same sense of humor. We liked the same things, and we could just talk and be relaxed and accepting, and it was so refreshing. And he was so fun and funny, and he brought so much joy and a level of happiness that I honestly did not think would be possible after what I'd been through. So, um,
I can relate to so much of that because much like you know, I never thought I was going to fall in love again. You know, some male company is nice, right? But I couldn't ever imagine feeling the magnitude of feelings that I had felt for Ben because we didn't get divorced, did we? There was no separation. We were still married. We still loved them as desperately at the end as we did at the beginning. So I couldn't kind of in my head imagine that I would ever be able to feel that again. But as we talked about briefly at the beginning, of course, the human heart is very powerful and it expands, and you are capable of loving. And it's like because we're not bitter from divorce, we sort of are much more open and more receptive to it. And if you do meet somebody that can bring joy to your life when so much joy has been sucked right out of it, then my God, you grab it, don't you?
absolutely. And Tim and he moved in, and we were actually going to get married on July 4th, 2020.
Oh, funny that. Me too. Well, not July, but in
Right.
2020.
So we had made our plans, and then March 2020 hits, and had to cancel everything. Thank you, COVID. And it was very hard. You know, so Tim works in the hotel industry. He travels a lot, and he was very accustomed to traveling a lot and being out of the house and having a career and working and sort of having that alone time, that recharge
Yeah.
time. And suddenly you're stuck in a house with two, sometimes three kids. Cole continued to stay with us quite a bit. And
I like to call that the baptism of fire, though. And the fact that you're still together probably means you can survive anything.
well, we did break up, actually.
Oh, did
We
you?
did at the
Goodness.
end in December of that year. It was just too
Too
much.
much.
And at that time I decided that I was going to move to the East Coast, back to where my family was from. And so in 2021, July 2021, I moved to Rhode Island, so to New England, and that's where I am right now. We very quickly realized that it was a mistake. It was a mistake to break up. We deeply, deeply loved each other, and we got back together. But I moved.
You then that this was taking a downward trajectory.
Well,
I still
so we decided that it was worth a shot to try to navigate a long term and long distance relationship. And we married in December of 2021. So we got married on December 28th. I flew to Seattle. We had the boys in these little tuxedo
you.
t-shirts. And we got married at the courthouse. And it was lovely. And so now I'm actually moving back to
Oh, you're going back. I
Washington.
was going to say, how's that working logistically for you? Some people would love a husband in a different state, but
It has been interesting, right? A lot of people are like, "Yeah, that works really well. Good for you."
and the boys are cool with moving back. They're happy.
Oh my gosh, I mean, it's been interesting. I would say, we've been able to be closer to some of my family, and living on the East Coast versus West Coast. I mean, I'm sure England is much the same way. You have personality types that tend to
We have a southern northern divide.
yeah, southern northern,
So I
right?
don't
There
know
you
whether you
go.
could pick up it. John's from the north of England and I'm from the south. But both of my husbands have been northerners. Apparently I have a type.
So they, I think it was good for them to have this experience. And actually, was just talking to Alex yesterday, and he said that he's glad that we moved
Oh,
here. He made a really good friend. He discovered a love of parkour, which he is just exceptional at, and tumbling and all of this just incredible athleticism that he's discovered, and so that has been huge for him. And Quentin has started playing piano. We have a baby grand piano that we bought with the house, and he started taking lessons, and now he's writing his own music. So these are positives that have come out of this move.
And I think it sounds like the boys are quite, or you're quite aware that, they need an interest in an activity, like
Yeah.
almost a mindfulness, piano playing and parkour is very good for taking you
Yeah.
out of your body, even though you're using your body. I mean, I'd be a nervous wreck, I think.
Yeah. Y
um, and
mm.
Jeremy's mum, are you still close to Jeremy's mum?
Um, I mean, we are definitely we stay connected. Some it used to be through Facebook, and now she's not doing that quite as much anymore. She is actually in, um, so her younger sister lives in Northern California. That was actually a place that was very special for Jeremy. Um, his I guess it was great uncle had a farm there, 7 acres, and so Jeremy used to farm there. He would grow melons and sell those at the farmers market. I mean, he's
Oh,
a
Dylan.
jack of all trades. What didn't he do? And so Marcia's sister and brother-in-law lived there, and so she sort of navigated toward there for a while, and then she actually uh, one of their good friends lost his wife to cancer about the same time that Jeremy and his father passed away, and so they sort of were match
Oh,
made. Yeah, so she's got a
nice.
companion now, and they just sold their house in Reno. They're living in Northern California now, and so they get along quite well. They've got a lot of shared experience. So
That's lovely because nobody
yeah,
wants to think of anybody being lonely, do they?
yeah. No, she's very excited that we are moving back to the West Coast
I
because we'll
bet
be
he
a
is.
lot
See
closer.
the
Yeah.
grandkids.
Yep.
Now, your mum,
Yeah.
she's got the same type of cancer, hasn't she, as Jeremy? And that is, I mean, what a kick in the what's it from the universe that is.
Yeah.
And we talk about, this idea that when you have an enormous tragedy, you almost feel, okay, well, at least that's me done. Like, at least that's my terrible thing that's happened.
Right.
But of course, it isn't the terrible thing. It might be. You might never have a terrible thing happen, but most of us are going to experience more terrible
Yeah.
things. We'd like to hope not of that magnitude. But losing your mum, that's pretty high up the list, right?
Well, she was diagnosed. She actually, so about 5 days after we arrived in Rhode Island. So she lives in Massachusetts. So this was going to be great because we would be closer together. So 5 days after we arrived in Rhode Island, she had a bowel perforation. She had emergency surgery, and she half of her colon was removed, and it had her bowel had ruptured, and so she had an ostomy bag uh, in 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 place. And if you know anything about ostomy bags, you know how lovely and fun they are. They have to be drained frequently and replaced. And there's a lot you learn about someone when you help them with their ostomy bag. And so
Bet.
this kind of goes back to Jeremy's oncologist's decision not to do surgery. Um, I think because he knew that Jeremy would have had to have an ostomy bag, and it would have significantly impacted his quality of life. And I think the his degree of spread, his degree of metastases throughout especially his lungs. I think the doctor just knew, this is not something that is going to be cured. So let's make things as improve the quality of life or maintain the quality of life as much as we possibly can. And so that was yeah, just going through this with my mom, I can see now why that decision was made to not go the surgery route.
And does that give you some degree of closure? Is that the right word? Because you talked that you were quite angry about this decision, and now you can understand it. Is that the anger dissipated a little?
It has. Yeah,
Knowledge is power, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And I think maybe if I could have had just a private conversation with the oncologist, maybe he would have explained that to me, or maybe not. I'm not sure.
Mm.
But I get it now, hindsight and all of that.
Let's be honest, you
Yeah.
had quite a lot to be angry about then, didn't you? Because, you
Yeah.
have every right to be angry when the person that you love is not going to be around for the rest of the journey with you. Oh, Emily, I've really enjoyed talking to you today. You are very, very, obviously a very, very articulate and incredibly clever woman. And the way you talk about Jeremy is so loving and so kind. And I feel I know him. I feel I know the man that he was. And I'm really happy that you have met somebody and that you are married again. You are building a life together. And it sounds, in the brief time that I've spoken to you here, like you are doing everything that you possibly can to protect yourself and those children. So well done, Mama.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rosie. And thank you for what you're doing.
I
Just
won't say it's
huge.
my pleasure, but that makes me sound a bit of a sadist, really. It's a pleasure to speak to these incredible human beings, and every single person I speak to just leaves me. They stay with me. They stay. And I feel very humbled and honoured that you have chosen to come and talk to me. So thank you very much. I wish you and your family, I wish you so much happiness, and I will absolutely stay in touch with you.
Thank you.
Take care, Emily. Thank you, everybody, for listening today. That was Emily Clark-Walton talking to you about her story. We'll be back with you soon for more from the front line of widowhood.